The government is backing away from their unpopular green policies in a bid to win the next election. Rishi Sunak says the government's target of hitting net zero emissions by 2050 must not impose unnecessary costs. Well, we saw in Uxbridge that ULEZ means you lose. So is it time for the Tories to do a net zero U-turn to help them win the general election? Alex, start with you. First of all, is it a good idea? Is it simply reactionary to a recent by-election victory? And more to the point, do you trust them as far as you can throw them?
Well, there's not anything wrong with saying when the facts change, I change my mind. And I think it's good to try to be honest and reflective of things. I did my fair share of campaigning in Uxbridge, as I imagine James did too. I can tell you there was no huge wave of affection for my party. It was because of ULEZ that the Conservative Party won that by-election. And despite the fact the Labour candidate locally, completely understandably, ditched the policy, said it was wrong and tried to take a different stance to the stance that his the mayor in London, Sadiq Khan, has. So ULEZ show that you can have a partisan advantage on these issues, and hitherto the main parties have broadly been in lockstep. People have always said about the UK, it's good that climate change is not a debate over which there's a partisan difference. Well, here we've seen an advantage gained by my party, by there being one. And I must say that the most important thing at the next election will be how much of the red wall the Conservative Party can hang on to. So I think that there are two things, while still trying to remain credible. The Conservative Party, because it's been in this position for so long on climate change, there are two things the Conservative Party could do between now and the next election that would be rational and help it electorally. The first would be to change the restriction on cars being banned by 2030 to match the European commitment. The Europeans have shifted their deadline to 2035. Why put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage for a relatively short period of time, which, to a point I'd like to know James's view on, of course, is something that would harm those comparatively the least well-off in society by banning combustible engines. And the second thing, of course, that we could at least do is continue to extract from the North Sea, to grant new licences. There is a clear point of difference between the Conservative Party and Labour. Starmer says he won't grant new licences. The Conservative Party say that we should. And I just point out that if we extracted all that we possibly could from everything that's known in the North Sea and did it all at once, we'd still be more than meeting our IPCC targets.
Right, so James, I'm going to cut to you. So this is about having a wedge issue, a point of difference. As Alex said there, a lot of people can't tell the difference between the Tories and the Labour Party anymore. A clear difference on ULEZ. The Tories are seeing an opportunity. This is something that will go down well, because while the principle of saving the planet, of course, we all agree with, the cost, the personal cost to households is what's hurting people and making them reconsider. Electorally, this is canny politics, isn't it?
So I want the Conservative Party to lose the next election and be punished for running the country extremely badly for the last 13 years. So if they did do this, I would be happy in electoral terms, because currently there aren't really very many dividing lines between Labour and the Tories, and this would create one. And this would.
You think this would help Labour?
Yeah, of course. If the next election is fought on, do you want to do things on the cost of living climate crisis, or do you not want to do things on the cost of living climate crisis, that is going to work to Labour's advantage. Now,
it didn't in Uxbridge.
Well, of course, but in Uxbridge, what are the circumstances we've got? We've got a policy that hasn't come in yet, so more people think it's going to impact them than they are. It's going to impact 1 in 10 cars, and in London about half of households have cars. So most people actually aren't going to be impacted.
But the poorest are impacted the worst.
Hold on. And it's in one city. The read across to the rest of the country, I really don't think.
There's clean air zones in Birmingham, Newcastle,
I
Norwich,
really don't
Edinburgh.
think works.
So, hang on, I want to be fair to James. On the one hand, the point that more people think they'll be affected than actually will be is a completely fair one. That's almost certainly true. On the other hand, you're running together the two terms, cost of living climate crisis, as if they are one thing.
They are.
They are not. And indeed, they may be in tension, certainly in the immediate term. If you say to a householder that they have to lose their boiler and have a heat pump, if they say they have to lose the car they bought relatively recently and have a new one, or to pay for, or 2015, depending on what kind of car it is. Then there may well be a conflict between a person's cost of living and the climate crisis that you identify. You can't just claim it all runs together.
As a macro thing, it certainly does. Part of the reason why food costs are higher is because of poor harvests that we had from the Spanish heat wave. I mean, these things are very much related. Part of the disruption to supply chains we're seeing, part of what I was talking about earlier about...
I thought it was Brexit that you blamed before.
Shush, I was delighted to hear him blame the Spanish, because people always blamed it on Brexit. So I'm very pleased to hear you say it was the Spanish heat wave.
No, well, the Spanish heat wave is certainly one of the things. And part of our supply chain problems was to do with difficulty moving goods around last year in Germany and China. These things absolutely are related, and I think if this is the dividing line the Tories want to have for Labour, that's actually good for Labour. Just wait, let me make this point, because at the moment the Labour strategy is otherwise to have no dividing lines, which means the Tories will get to set it closer to the time.
James, don't you think that the ULEZ point shows that in some communities at least, people will think that with effectively, just put it bluntly, we're advancing, whilst people accept the need to address the climate issues, we're advancing on it too quickly?
Yeah, I think people just want a clear choice, actually, don't they? They want an alternative, because at the moment we have a uni party. They're all basically, I think, Greta Thunberg in disguise.
Oh, if only.
Do we have...
I was trying to ask James was, I think people have the sense they would like to do something to help the environment as long as we're not too hair-shirt about it. If you make it easy for people to recycle, they'll do it. If you tell them they have to put a hole in the wall, take out the boiler and stick in a heat pump in every house, they think to themselves, this is going too far.
10 grand. It's a 10 grand sort of mistake. And the SNP today are saying you cannot sell a house. Bring a law. You can't sell your house unless it has a heat pump. A £10,000 penalty to every homeowner. That, I think, is punishing punitive politics. And I think if people were given the chance to vote, they would choose.
But I want to know what James thinks, because it seems to me some of these policies are punishing the least well-off in society. And normally the left-wing position would be to be in their interest.
On the ULEZ, for example, with the terribly named ULEZ, which has had bad comms and bad rollout, for example, that policy, I think they should have all of the money that's raised from it should go into a scrappage scheme, which should go from the bottom up. So,
because at the moment it's just going to TfL, isn't
right,
it?
Yeah, precisely.
So
that should 200 million that raises, that should go to a scrappage scheme from the bottom up, from self-employed and lower income. So for them, it isn't presented as a cost. This is, you can upgrade your car.
Yes, but you see, so I like that. And the Labour Party would be in a better position if you were advocating that. But sadly, you are not. And the argument between the Labour Party is advancing the scheme, as Sadiq Khan says, unchanged, or thinking again and not expanding, which is the Starmer position. Which one is